Kia ora, welcome to the Cleine Line. I'm Jamie Cleine, Mayor of Bulla, and this podcast is a place for honest conversations about local government, life on the coast, and everything in between. This isn't the official council line, it's my personal take, with no spin, no script, just open reflections on what's happening in our communities, around the council table, and sometimes from the halls of Parliament too. Today we're talking water, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we cover this subject. But today we're not talking about floods or boil water notices. It's about what the government is now legally telling councils we must do when it comes to managing our three waters. That's drinking water, wastewater and stormwater under the so-called local water done well reforms. Sounds pretty friendly, right? Local, done well, what's not to like about that? Well, turns out there's a lot to unpack. So grab a cuppa, maybe a glass of wine, and let's get into it. Every council in Aotearoa has been told you've got until the 3rd of September 2025 to show us how you're going to deliver water services safely, affordably and sustainably, and in a way that actually works. This means councils must submit what's called a Water Services Delivery Plan, a WSDP, because we love an acronym in local government. Now this plan has to cover 10 years, a decade, and explain who's delivering those water services. Will it be council itself, a new council-controlled organisation, or some other form of partnership with other councils? What state the pipes and treatment plants are in, and let's be honest, probably not amazing in many cases. And how are you going to pay for it, and how you make sure the money actually goes back into water and not roads or playgrounds or rates relief. So councils are effectively being asked to put up a long-term business case for their water services or face some consequences under the legislation. Let's break this down to what the legislation says we must do. We have to develop a detailed costed 10-year water services delivery plan. We have to choose a fit-for-purpose delivery model that's financially and operationally sustainable. We have to ring-fence all water revenue so it can only be used on water services. We have to prepare for economic regulation. That means price quality controls and information disclosure to the Commerce Commission. Now this is a totally new requirement and one councils have never had to work through. We have to report annually on how we're going, and yes, there's a legislated template to do that. And we have to plan for climate risks and resilience. Think things like stormwater and Westport, or the need for new investments in Northern Bulla that are more able to handle severe weather events. So it's not just a pretty policy brochure, this is legislation, and council has to comply. So there is a spicy bit to this new legislation. If a council doesn't submit a compliant plan, or if it looks like a council can't manage its water services safely or sustainably, the government has what's called a new backstop power. That means the minister can step in and appoint a facilitator, or in serious cases even a commissioner, to take over water service decisions. In plain English, if we screw it up, we could lose local control, the very thing these reforms are supposed to preserve. So here in Bulla, like a lot of smaller councils, we've had to take a hard look at how we're going to deliver safe, affordable water services in the long term. We've made a pretty big call, we've had a good look at this, and we've decided to form a multi-council CCO. That's a council-controlled organisation to manage water services going forward. We're not alone in this. Our mates down at Grey District have made the same decision, and now we're working together on what this new water entity might look like. Westland District Council is still considering whether it wants to jump on board, and fair enough, it's a really big decision for any council. To keep things moving, both Bulla and Grey have delegated the Mayor, that's me, and 2 councillors from each council to work alongside our executive teams. Our job is to negotiate the establishment arrangements for the new CCO. That means governance, staffing, asset ownership, funding models, risk, liability and reporting, all the juicy bits. It's a big job and it's going to take a bit of time and some really clear thinking by all of us. But we reckon a shared model like this gives us the best shot at achieving scale, sharing costs and expertise, and still holding on to local ownership and accountability. because at the end of the day, these are our pipes, our communities, and our responsibility, even if we're doing it together. So it might be useful if I cover off what a council-controlled organisation basically is. So a CCO is basically a separate company or organisation that councils create and own, either entirely or along with other councils. It runs effectively like a business, but it's still accountable to the public because we, the councils, are the shareholders. Think of it like setting up a dedicated water company, but just not one that's run by central government or the private sector. It's still owned by us, by ratepayers, but it's professionally governed and managed with clear reporting requirements and financial ring fencing. Importantly, a CCO has its own board and its own focus. It's not going to be trying to juggle roads, parks, libraries, and dog control, all the other things that councils do. It'll only do water, and it'll be judged on how well it does that. Now, you might be thinking, why not just keep it inside council? And that's a fairly good question. That would be called an internal business unit, and it's how most councils currently run water services. The water team sits within the council using council systems, staff, policies, and budgets. The problem? It's often stretched thin, underfunded, and tied up in bureaucracy. It can also be harder to get the specialist staff and tech you need to meet the increasing national regulatory standards. Under Local Water Done Well, councils are now expected to meet much more rigorous regulation. Things like economic regulation from the Commerce Commission I mentioned earlier, annual performance reporting, the transparent pricing model, and that 10-year financial and infrastructure planning. It's a really heavy lift, and honestly, for small councils like Bulla, we just don't have the scale to do that on our own, and if we did, it would come at significantly higher cost than if we were part of a larger entity. Now, this leads us to scale, and scale often equals capability. Because regulators don't care whether you're Auckland or you're Refton. You still have to prove you're charging fair prices based on actual costs for the water services, plan for the next 10 years, maintain infrastructure to the new national standards, respond to the emergencies, recruit and retain the technical and specialist staff. Doing that with a handful of our local engineers and a part-time or a small finance team is simply not realistic. By forming a multi-council CCO like Buller and Grey are doing, and hopefully with Westland joining us soon, we can pull those resources, attract and retain the right talent, invest in shared technology and systems, and standardise reporting and procurement, meeting our regulatory requirements, if you like, without breaking the bank. It's about still staying local, but not going it completely on our own. So Buller has made some of those key decisions to head down the path now of negotiating and establishing a multi-council CCO. So over the coming months, we'll be negotiating how this CCO will be set up, governance, staffing, ownership, accountability, the whole works. And it's going to be really complex, but crucial and critical that we make the effort and get it right at the get-go. Because here's the deal, if we don't do it well, the government can literally step in and take over. And I'd much rather build something with our neighbouring councils than have Wellington send someone in with a clipboard and the locals lose control. So that's the CCO deep dive. It's not just letters and acronyms, it's potentially the future of your water services, not only here in Bulla, but right across the West Coast. Now, another thing I think it's critical for everyone in the Bulla to understand is that one of the features of Local Water Done Well is an acceleration of investment into the water services network, and it's legislation that is driving that. So what that means is that every scenario is more expensive than what everyone is paying today. So what our modelling suggested was that the internal business unit would be far more expensive per consumer than if we were to form the multi-council CCO. Now for Bulla, that's around $1,000 per household in outgoing years. So I think that's something that is really important for everyone to understand. This won't mean cheaper prices compared to today's rate, but it will mean cheaper than the alternative options would have been, in particular to meet the new local water done well investment requirements, quality requirements, and economic regulation requirements. So the legislation sets quite a tight timeline for the water service delivery plans. That's that September date that we all must meet. So the multi-council CCO will be the basis of the water services delivery plan, and that gets submitted to government for their approval. And then ultimately, though, I think what's important to remember is that the new CCO would not be live potentially until 1 July 2027. Now, I said at the start of this podcast that local water done well was hugely complex, and this certainly won't be the last podcast that I bring to update you on progress there. But on reflection, the decision around a multi-council CCO had to be balanced with what looks like a pretty clear win for our consumers or ratepayers in outgoing years by scaling up and joining up with some other councils to form a multi-council CCO. What we also know is that the new regulations and requirements are now legislated for through local water done well, and the water quality regulator, Taumata Arawai, will apply whatever entity or whatever mechanism is used to deliver water services going forward. Now, that's going to come with significant costs, and again, seems to be a better bet if you are scaled up and you're paying that once rather than 3 times across the West Coast by each council doing all of that on their own. The other thing I think I'd also reflect on is how well the status quo has been serving our community over potentially decades. We have among the most expensive water services as a council in the South Island. I think we're either the highest or second highest now. And yet our network, by public opinion and feedback from our community, is not living up to the expectation our community wants. So something had to change. The government, and both governments, previous and the current one, were pretty determined to significantly shake up the water services delivery sector. And I think that required a step change in thinking by council as well. And so a multi-council CCO, effectively a whole new approach, provides, in my view, that step change that both governments were looking for to provide those services to our communities in a more cost-effective, efficient and reliable, resilient way. I guess only time will tell how successful we are in that endeavour. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to the Cleine Line. This podcast is here to spark conversation, share a bit of insight, and shine a light on the things that matter to Buller. But I also want to hear what matters to you. If there's an issue you'd like my thoughts on, someone in the community we should feature, or a topic you think deserves some airtime, send me an email, jamie@thecleineline.com. I'll be back next time with more updates, reflections, and what's been happening around the district. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk again soon.